What's up, guys? Welcome back to the channel. Here we are with another reaction. In this, we have why the Netherlands stopped being the world's most tolerant country. Before we dive into this, if you guys happen to enjoy, please don't forget to smash that subscribe button, give the video a thumbs up. Also, if you like to support the channel by becoming a member, all you gotta do is hit the join button to receive your exclusive benefits. Let's get to it.
A few years ago, no one would have believed that this man would become the top political leader in the Netherlands. It's Geert Wilders. In November 2023, his party was the most voted in the general elections. And to achieve that, he said things like these.
Woke is over. Multiculturalism and mass immigration has proven to be a total failure. The majority of the Europeans are very clear in what they want. They want secure borders. They want an end to mass immigration. They want us to expel illegal aliens and criminals from our countries.
For decades, the Netherlands was considered the most tolerant country in Europe.
Yeah.
They legalized same-sex marriage, soft drugs, and euthanasia before anyone else. And for centuries, they celebrated religious and cultural pluralism as a national virtue. But we know that something changed when the most voted party proposed closing mosques, banning the Quran, and declaring Islam incompatible with democracy. How can a society like the Netherlands, built on tolerance, produce a leader who wants to restrict it? This wasn't an accident. It was the result of a silent process.
I think so many people are getting fed up. For so many people in the world are starting to see the identity of their country change. People are facing housing crisis, cost of living crisis. Everything's getting more expensive. These countries can't sustain as many people as they're letting in, and it's making it harder on the people that are already there. And so that's what you see. You see a lot of frustration, a lot of people fed up, a lot of people upset, a lot of people angry, and they see immigration as that main issue for why why everything has changed and things are so expensive. And so I understand where they're coming from. That sentiment is not just in the Netherlands. That sentiment's all over Europe. It's in the US. It's happening all over the world. And so yeah, I think people are just getting fed up, tired. And you're seeing in these countries two groups: one pro-immigration, one anti-mass immigration, or illegal immigration. So you see everybody coming at each other, nobody listening to each other, and you just have these battles, I guess, between two different groups, and nobody's listening, so the issue never gets solved.
Of a fracture that grew over decades, while everyone pretended it didn't exist. This is the story of a society so open that one day it no longer knew what held it together. In the 17th century, while Protestantism was prohibited in France and in Spain they burned heretics at the stake, in the Netherlands, Catholics and Protestants lived together peacefully. At the same time, they managed to open up to the world and become a global commercial power. It was that double pressure between internal religious fragmentation and the need to trade with everyone that forged their reputation as a tolerant nation. The Dutch understood before anyone else that you couldn't build a global power by persecuting the different. You had to welcome them.
For sure.
So Amsterdam became a refuge for minorities persecuted across Europe, and it was a capital of printing, free thought, and global trade. But that tolerance had a condition. All those minorities who were different accepted living within the cultural framework of Dutch society. You could have your religion, your language, and your customs as long as you didn't challenge the common norms that kept the country unified.
I get that.
Norms that had roots in Calvinism, which promoted the ethics of individual effort, austerity, and discipline as central virtues. It was an invisible contract that everyone understood even though no one named it. A contract that remained alive for centuries, keeping a fragile balance between openness, tolerance, and internal cohesion. In this context, by the mid-20th century, the Netherlands was one of the most progressive and liberal societies in the world. They were pioneers in fighting for the legalization of controlled recreational drug use and the recognition of rights for gay people. But despite this climate of freedom, something began to break. In the 1960s, the Dutch economy was booming. Unemployment was below 2%, the country was growing rapidly, exporting and modernizing, but it didn't have enough workers to sustain the growth.
Oh,
It didn't have people to do the hardest, most repetitive, and poorly paid jobs.
dang.
To solve
I already get where it's going. I already see where it's going. The Netherlands is thriving, but you needed more workers. You had to bring in immigrants, right? Immigrants came over, they worked, but then they started to make a life over here. And so now you have all these immigrants who are starting to have kids and now immigrate here. Yeah. I feel like it's tough. It's tough to make that call because I've always said personally, me, like, yeah, I get there are criminals that come over. Yeah, people come over illegally. Yeah, people come over with bad intentions. There are also a lot of people that are coming to the country for more opportunity, coming to the country because their country is full of violence or hatred. And so they need somewhere to go. And I couldn't be the one to turn them around. But I think there has to be someone who does say, you know what, like, we can only sustain so many. Because with me running things, the country would be literally like feel way past capacity because I couldn't turn anyone away. So I think there has to be a balance. There has to be right. You're letting some in, but at the same time, as heartbreaking as it is, there has to be someone who is like the country just can't sustain any more people at the moment. And because the more you let in, the more overcrowded everything becomes, the more expensive because now there's all this demand and not enough supply, so things are getting super expensive. And yeah, y'all tell me what y'all think though. That's just how I feel.
this problem, the government signed a series of bilateral agreements with other countries. So, between 1965 and 1975, more than 110,000 workers arrived from Turkey and Morocco, in addition to other European countries.
Mm-hmm.
In the following years, with family reunification, that number grew. And by
Mm-hmm.
1980, more than 200,000 non-European immigrants lived in the Netherlands, almost entirely concentrated in the largest cities. The term for these immigrants was explicit. They were gastarbeiters, guest workers. The idea was that they would be temporary workers, coming for a few years, saving money, and returning to their home countries. But with the Moroccan and Turkish workers, that almost never happened. Most stayed along with their families, customs, language, and religion. What's most surprising is that once they stayed, no one in the government thought about how to integrate them. There were no requirements to learn Dutch, no policies to promote citizenship or common values. In the name of tolerance, they were encouraged to preserve their cultural practices intact, to maintain their religious identity, and to educate their children in their native language. The state funded Arabic and Turkish classes within the school system and promoted so-called passive multiculturalism. It was something like living together, but separately. It was assumed that long-term coexistence would be enough to generate spontaneous integration. In short, any form of assimilation was avoided because, in the intellectual climate of the time, it was considered a form of cultural colonialism. And so, for the first time in its history, the Dutch state offered openness and tolerance without requiring integration in return. They stopped being an open society with shared norms. In this ideological framework, immigrants were placed in specific neighborhoods in the large cities of the country through public housing programs. And there, over time, closed communities began to form, becoming true parallel societies. Entire neighborhoods became foreign enclaves, where Dutch was not spoken and where the proportion of Moroccan or Turkish residents was over 80%. Children went to schools in their communities, while their parents maintained the expectation, increasingly distant, of returning one day to their home country. But they would never return. And unknowingly, the country had stopped building a cohesive society and started building one of separate cultures. Although at first, this didn't seem problematic. The first generation that came from Morocco and
It was tough because you needed the people, so you brought them over to work. And I guess you thought they were going to go home after a few years, but maybe there should have been some kind of contract in place or that said they had to or something. But you think no, they decided to stay. Now they're having kids. Now they're family reunification. Now you're putting them in certain areas, so live together, be together separately. So now you have a whole group of them forming communities, and nobody's integrating them like they said. And so it's like you can't really just send them back now because now they built a life here and they paid taxes and they've helped and they're citizens. But since they were never integrated, now their values and beliefs might not match with the Dutch culture values and beliefs, and now that's where you start to butt heads.
Turkey worked hard, accepted the conditions, and didn't get into trouble. Crime rates were lower than those of native Dutch people.
Oh
They
wow!
didn't speak the language, but they knew they were there to build a better future for their children. But those children, the ones born or raised in the Netherlands, grew up caught between two worlds. They
Yeah.
weren't fully integrated into Dutch society, but
Mm.
they didn't fully belong to their parents' culture either. They grew up without clear roots, without a sense of
Mhm.
belonging, and without a defined horizon. And in that intermediate generation, those who arrived as children or were born in the country, the cultural fracture became more visible, a fracture that persists to this day. In immigrant neighborhoods, school dropout rates skyrocketed, and the mastery of Dutch is almost non existent. This
Mm.
resulted in high youth unemployment rates, social
Mm.
frustration, and a significant increase in criminal activities.
Of
More than
course.
half of young men of Moroccan origin had been suspected of at least one crime by the time they turned 23, and some studies put that number at 65%. Neighborhoods like the Balmer in Amsterdam, built in the 60s and 70s as idealistic modernist projects, turned into areas invisible to the social system with high rates of vandalism
Mm.
and crime. And the response from
Wow.
the education system didn't help. Instead of mixing, it separated further when the so-called black schools appeared. Schools where more than 50% of the students are of non-Western origin. In some areas, there are primary schools where more than 90% of the students come from immigrant homes. In entire districts, mosques replaced churches, supermarkets adapted to Islamic food standards, and community customs were far from the secular and liberal standard of Dutch society.
But how do you expect there to be any sort of integration if at every turn you're separating these two people, these two cultures? You're separating them in every way that you possibly can, but you're expecting them to integrate. Like, you're not even giving them an opportunity to do it. Um, so that's kind of wild. So it does make sense to me why they didn't integrate. And as a kid growing up and seeing like I'm the people who look like me are all over here, and the people who don't look like me are over there. And so you're creating that divide. And I'm seeing maybe my parents not working their butts off, but maybe don't have as much as I'm seeing all these kids' parents having and all the stuff and how they're living and what they're getting. So why then would I follow my what my parents did if that got them nowhere, right? And they got everything over here. I'm not gonna follow that path. So you drop out of school. Now you turn to a life of crime, which is, I think, I mean, I wouldn't condone crime in any way, shape, form, or fashion, but it's like, dang, all of these things have kind of led to this point, right? It wasn't like they just were criminals out of nowhere. You see what developed into them having more percent, I guess, a higher percentage of criminal activity than the Western people who lived in the Netherlands. So let's continue though. Let's continue.
But it's not just a difference in language or religion, it's a difference in cultural values.
Yeah.
According to a 2014 study by Berlin Social Science Center, 65% of Muslims surveyed in Western Europe, including the Netherlands, believe that religious rules of Islam should take priority over the laws of the country where they live.
Oh,
While 60% don't want to have gay friends, 47% say they can't trust Jews, and 53% believe that the West wants to destroy Islam. These are not minor disagreements. They're deeply different
nah.
worldviews, and often
Yeah.
incompatible ones.
Those kind of things build hatred, anger, and those kind of, yeah. To have a difference in beliefs like that, to believe that, like, right, 65, and I don't have an issue like with that, but it's like it kind of keeps everybody separate. And for me, I think the biggest issue was the you believe your religious rules are above the laws of the land, and so, and I think anybody who believes in any religion, to an extent, does believe that. But I think you got to follow the laws of the land. Like, just because I guess your religion says you can do this, if it's against the law, like, you can't do that. And so I think that that's big. And then, yeah, them not wanting to be friends with gay people is, of course, absolutely ridiculous. I don't understand why, but that's their religion. And I'm not here to disrespect anybody's religion. Um, so we're going to keep the video going.
And this can be seen in specific situations. Public pools with gender segregated hours, pressure on girls to wear a veil, and teachers facing cultural authority challenges in their own classrooms. In some neighborhoods, religious codes become parallel norms that compete with the authority of the state,
That's
because those who
wild.
uphold them see themselves as part of a community with their own rules, living inside the Netherlands, but not
I
necessarily
mean,
within its culture.
but you did
And
separate
this cultural
them.
fracture also destabilized the country's economic system. Unemployment among people of Moroccan or Turkish origin is more than twice that of native Dutch citizens. And more than 40% of Moroccan households rely entirely or partially on state aid. The pressure on the system is huge.
Yeah.
More spending on education, more strain on the healthcare system, and more investment in public security. Some warn that if this trend continues, the Dutch welfare state model could become unsustainable in certain regions.
Yeah.
Because a society cannot sustain itself if a significant portion of its population fails to integrate into the labor market, but still depends on the system that others fund.
Yeah.
Added to all of this, the real underlying problem is that for decades, no one wanted to see what was happening. The model worked as long as no one questioned it.
Sorry, my son. He keeps moving around trying to get in a comfortable position. So if you hear that beeping, that's him.
The economy grew, the cultural elites maintained their moral authority, and the troubled neighborhoods were off the radar of decision makers. The political consensus was to avoid cultural confrontation. Center-left and center-right parties tacitly agreed to keep the immigrant issue out of electoral debate. It shouldn't become a political tool, it shouldn't polarize the country, and above all, it shouldn't fuel racism. Multiculturalism was a moral mandate, and any criticism was interpreted as a form of intolerance. The media, in line with this moral consensus, prioritized positive stories of integration, while the worrying data about school dropout rates, youth unemployment, or violence in segregated neighborhoods were relegated to footnotes. Academics who warned of structural problems were discredited. Public officials who called for a review of immigration policy were displaced or silenced. And citizens who expressed concern were labeled as reactionary or xenophobic.
Yeah.
But not everyone accepted this new moral code. In 2002, Pim Fortuyn, a sociologist turned politician, broke with that narrative, proposing that the problem wasn't immigration, but the lack of integration. And above all, the refusal of Dutch society to recognize it. Fortuyn wasn't a right-wing extremist. He was openly gay, a defender of secularism and the welfare state. But he warned that liberal values were at risk, and that political Islam represented a threat to gender equality, freedom of expression, and national cohesion. His candidacy grew as an unexpected phenomenon, and with it, the idea that maybe the country needed to talk about what it had been silent about for decades.
Yeah.
But on May 6, 2002, 9 days before the elections, Fortuyn was murdered by a radical activist who declared he did it to protect Muslims. It was the first political assassination in the Netherlands in more than 3 centuries, and the clearest sign that silence hadn't prevented violence, it had incubated it. 2 years later, another.
Because the way he sounded like he could be the bridge, bro. The way he sounded, the way he just talked about him, like he could have been the bridge to help that integration. But him being assassinated and saying it was for Muslims, either they did it to keep them separated, not for Muslims, but maybe someone, it was an inside job, it was a plant, or maybe it was actually for Muslims. But either way, I think that just sucks, bro. Like he sounded like he could have been that bridge to integrate and unite the two. And you got, I think there's blame that falls on both sides. I think, like he said, you have a whole country who's ignored them for so long, who, right, just left, like separated them and kind of left them. And then you have the people. I mean, the people, don't get me wrong, personal responsibility. You have the ability to go out, learn the language, figure things out yourself. But I think they were just And I get why these communities, they were ignored. So I get now why they followed their own rules. Cause like, bro, y'all didn't care nothing about us over here when we were struggling. Y'all didn't reach out a hand to help us. Y'all separated us. And so now, yeah, they're unemployed because I'm sure a lot of them don't know Dutch. They haven't integrated, and so now the unemployment rate is high. The dropout rate in school is high, and now that's going to lead to crime. And now the crime rate's going to start going high. And all of this, you just feel like could have been avoided. And at this point, it's reached its boiling point, and so it just sucks when it could have been avoided much earlier.
Episode shocked the country. Theo van Gogh, a filmmaker and columnist, was murdered in broad daylight by a Dutch Islamist of Moroccan origin. He had directed a short film critical of the treatment of women in Islamic contexts. From then on, fear settled in permanently. Not just fear of extremism, but fear of speaking, debating, dissenting.
Yeah.
Because in the new cultural logic, the one who pointed out the problem became the problem. And so, a society paralyzed by its own identity was born. Convinced of its openness, proud of its tolerance, but one day waking up in a country it no longer recognized. By then, the cultural fracture was no longer a marginal issue, it was the invisible center of the life of the country. It was present in the neighborhoods, in the schools, and in the accumulated resentment of those who felt something had broken, but no one could talk about it. That gap between what was lived and what could be said was what opened the door to a different kind of leadership. One that didn't come with nuances or euphemisms, nor did it offer complex solutions. That's when Geert Wilders emerged. A career politician who had passed through the Liberal Party, but frustrated with the political correctness of his colleagues, founded the Party for Freedom, PVV, in 2006. From day one, the issue was one: Islam.
Our culture, which is based on Christianity, Judaism and humanism, is better than the retarded Islamic culture. And this is tough to say, but it's true.
Wilders didn't talk about multiculturalism. He talked about Islam as a totalitarian ideology disguised as a religion. He called for closing the borders to Muslim countries, closing mosques, banning the Quran, and declaring Islam incompatible with democracy.
Islam preaches hate.
And this is what happens when it reaches its boiling point, when people are integrated properly. It's its boiling point, and now you have this talk of like, it almost feels like kind of hatred, in a sense. And that sucks. Because there are, you know what I'm saying? It's a sucky situation because I don't immediately think of the criminals in my head. I immediately think of like the innocent people who have integrated or who, right, are friendly with with everyone, the Dutch, Islam, everybody, right there, no matter what religion, race, sexuality. I think of those people who are, and I just kind of think of like them, like being, if there's something big happens, maybe deportation, whatever, them being caught in it, and that to me, like, or them like being hated, or people hating them for that. That sucks to me. That's what stinks.
Propagates violence and is barbaric and violent by nature. It wants all Muslims to submit. It is incompatible with freedom as we know it.
His brutal statements and aggressive style resonated socially because he said what many thought, but no one else dared to say.
Yeah.
He even published Fitna, a short film that generated enormous international controversy. In it, he denounced what he considered the link between Islam and violent extremism, using verses from the Quran interspersed with images of terrorist attacks. In his first elections in 2006, Wilders' PVV won 9 seats in parliament. 4 years later, in 2010, it rose to 24 seats, becoming the third largest force in the country, just 7 seats behind the most voted force. And since then, it never disappeared. Not from parliament, not from the public debate, nor from the center of conversation.
Yeah.
Over the years, his rhetoric evolved. He went from calling for the closure of mosques to demanding less non-Western immigration, and expanded his topics to security and the economy. His voters didn't necessarily share all of his proposals. They were simply fed up with institutional silence. And Wilders, with his incendiary remarks, at least didn't pretend everything was fine. His figure grew alongside social discontent, and the more they tried to silence him, the more he grew. He was excluded from parliamentary deals, tried for incitement to hatred, subjected to assassination attempts and threats, and lives to this day under permanent police protection.
Jesus.
But his discourse is no longer marginal. It's part of the center of the debate. According to a report from the Netherlands Institute for Social Research, published in September 2024, immigration and integration are the main social issue for 37% of citizens. While 2017 studies from the Brookings Institute showed that 45% of Dutch people thought Islam was incompatible with Western values. These are figures that reflect a deep discontent in a large part of society. Because while traditional politicians talked about diversity as wealth, many citizens experienced it as a loss of identity and common sense. Wilders didn't do anything but gather those feelings and turn them into a political platform, which resonated with a part of the country that didn't feel heard by traditional parties and saw how their neighborhoods were changing without anyone discussing it. In the general elections of 2023, the PVV won a quarter of the seats and became the party with the most representation in the House of Representatives. And although Wilders wasn't prime minister, his party managed to form a coalition and dominate the legislative agenda. But in June 2025, Wilders pulled his party out of the ruling coalition in a row over immigration and asylum policy, leading to the resignation of Prime Minister Dick Schoof and the collapse of the government. The rise of Wilders as a political leader was the result of a system that preferred silence and postponed the conflict. But today, the conflict can no longer be postponed, and the question is already inevitable. Can a society survive without a common identity? Without sharing a language, history, or a common vision of the future? For centuries, the Netherlands was a historical exception, a nation that managed to open up to the world without losing its cohesion and knew how to welcome the different without ceasing to be itself. A society built on tolerance, but within a common framework. It was a fragile but real balance. Today, that balance is broken. Tolerance is still there, but cohesion has been lost. There's no integration, no shared identity. What exists are separate communities, each with its own values and rules. And the worst part is that between them, there are fewer bridges to connect them. That's why the question facing the Netherlands today isn't whether it should be more open or strict, or whether it should close its borders or reform its migration model. The real question is whether it is still possible to rebuild a shared common sense beyond the differences. Because an open society can only sustain itself if there's something that everyone shares. And when that's gone, when the word "we" loses its meaning, a society stops being a society and becomes something else. It's a space where everyone lives together, but no one feels part of the same thing anymore. What happens in the coming years will tell us if the Netherlands is truly an exception or if it was just a fragile balance that time couldn't sustain. That's it for today's video. If you liked it, don't forget to watch the next one.
Yeah, that was tough. That was tough because now I don't like people like him. I'll be honest. Like, I feel like to me, like when I listen to him, like I just like inside of me just feels like wrong, like upset, like it feels like he's spewing hatred. It doesn't feel good when I listen to him. And so I don't like, and don't get me, he may be like very popular in the Netherlands, and I'm not disrespecting him in any type of way because I see why people like him get into power because there's so many people. You have the citizens in the Netherlands who probably feel like if the foreigners are such a or immigrants that are such a drain on the system, then right now they feel like, well, dang, all our money's going there. Like we're struggling so much over here, but nobody's looking out for us. Looks like everything just goes to them. And so now they're getting mad and now they're getting frustrated. Their hatred is directed at them and they're mad over there because, I mean, they look how they lived compared to the rest of the country, right? Everybody's living good. We're stuck in this housing. We were brought over here. We were left here. We were abandoned. No one helped integrate us. No one helped teach us Dutch. We're kids put into schools. We're separated. We've been separated for so long, and now everybody's mad at us because we formed our own community and we live by our own rules when they were the ones who separated us. And so it's just frustration, and it's from both sides. And that first politician that was assassinated. I hate that he was, because from this video it just sounded like he definitely could have been a bridge to connect the two. He definitely sounded like a unifier. And this guy right here, I just it feels like he spews hatred, and he's taking people's feelings of frustration and he's turning them into anger. And I don't like it. I don't like it one bit. Uh, yeah, that's all we have. Y'all talk to me in the comment section. If you enjoyed, don't forget to subscribe, give it a thumbs up.